Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Baiano. Welcome to Child's Gallery. We're here for a virtual artist talk with William Evertson on his new series of woodblock prints titled SCOTUS 6. We are going to discuss the exhibition, and it features a suite of woodblock prints that are all about the conservative Supreme Court justices. It's now on view in our print department through December 1st. As I mentioned, my name is Richard Baiano. I'm president of Child's Gallery. We are open Tuesday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6, and Saturday through Sunday, 11 to 5 p.m. We are open to the public, and I do invite everyone to come and see the exhibitions. So there will be a question and answer session following William's comments. So I would invite everyone to submit questions via the chat feature during the presentation, and we will pass them along to William. So I won't give too much of an introduction to William, but he's been a printmaker for many, many years. We met William first through the Boston printmakers, and he joined the gallery for our first exhibition after the pandemic that was titled Capital Offense, which had just happened at the time. And it just so happens that that print is currently on exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston in an exhibition titled Power of the People, Art and Democracy. And inevitably, that's what we will be talking about this evening. So here is William at his wheel. And so what's interesting, I think, about William's work that I think makes him unique is that both there is a historical connection to all of the work itself, and then he uses his art as a form of political activism. And so with different collaged imagery, he blends appropriated historical art with contemporary references, and the result is familiar and irreverent scenes with very biting social commentary. So with that, William, I'm going to let you take the conversation from here, and I'll go to the first slide.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Richard. I really want to thank you for the nice introduction, and also thanks to directors Julie and Catherine for their help on this. Also thanks to Alex and Yvonne from your gallery. And of course, thank you to everybody that's here listening tonight. There was some discussion about the timing of this talk and whether it should be before or after the election. And ultimately, we decided that the exhibition's focus, that is, my new suite of prints based on the far-right Supreme Court, would not change depending on the outcome of the election. I mean, the first Trump presidency actually gave us the 6-3 conservative court, which is the exhibit subject. On reflection, I think we were only partially correct. The focus seems way different now than before, because before there was really a sense of hope. The Trump victory is a shock to many of us Harris supporters, of course. As a progressive, I feel a sense of loss and of grieving, and I feel like, in a way, we're losing part of our democracy here. It comes with the same uncertainty that I felt with the second jet hitting the Twin Towers. It's like we don't know what's going to come next. Yet, many of us do, because some of us are familiar with the Project 2025 checklist. That's a checklist for enshrining a kind of Christio-fascist, illiberal minority rule for a faux democracy here in America. Now, pundits are going to be second-guessing and tearing apart the Harris campaign and defeat forever. And I've seen a lot of a lot of causes why this happened. I don't have any answers. I know that I am disappointed. And I know that we've been here before, though. And a lot of my art is about those echoes. Now, chaos has ruled the day before because just in my lifetime, JFK was killed, the same with Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated. When I was an art student and I was nervous about the draft for Vietnam, National Guard killed students at Kent State for protesting the Vietnam War. And the FBI's CONTELPRO operation spied on our entire progressive and anti-war movement. Nixon and Reagan both won huge landslide victories that set progressive policies back. I mean, it seems bleak, but we've fought back before. Now, my prints examine current rhetoric through historic counterpoints as I view the cultural and political world and socio-political commentary. The works that follow are all woodblock prints. They are made first by carving an image into a plywood sheet, which is inked, papers laid onto the block and rolled through a press under pressure to form an impression. The multiple color prints require separate blocks for each color and some finesse to register and print one after the other. Conceptually, these woodcuts highlight my fascination with collage. They're inspired by surrealism and symbolist art. The pieces are developed with an eye to art history and current events. The medium of printmaking itself is traditionally one of communication and protest. Now, the slide that you're looking at now is a tale of two Ginnies. Ginny, of course, being the wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, who in her own right is a lobbyist and the head of a conservative think tank. The piece on the right became my jumping off point for the entire SCOTUS series. It was inspired by a series of articles that I was reading on ProPublica, which concerned the problematic gifts of billionaire Harlan Crow made to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. They totaled over $4 million throughout their friendship. And Crow was provided with luxury vacations. He funded Ginny Thomas's think tank, paid a mortgage on Thomas' mother's home, paid tuition for Thomas's nephew, among other large unreported gifts on Thomas's yearly financial disclosures. So as I was designing the piece, in my mind's eye, I was picturing a scene with Clarence and Ginny dancing on a fallen Lady Justice statue. Now, the dancing pose itself of the main characters here was inspired by an etching from the 1790s by an artist called John Fahey, titled Tam O'Shanter and the Witches. I just kind of loved that pose and borrowed it, and it became the Ginny and Thomas Clarence pose. Now, due to her outsized influence in far-right political circles, I titled the piece after Thomas's wife, Ginny. The piece itself is completed by a crumbling Supreme Court facade, and the dancers celebrate their really untouchable lifetime tenure. I first exhibited that piece at the Mosian Center in Watertown, Mass. And after an artist talk there, I started receiving some good feedback that encouraged me to begin a series that was going to be based on the court and its outsized activism with its 6-3 conservative majority. On the left side is the second but downsized similar version that became part of my SCOTUS 6 series. The piece on the right that I started with was a full 43 by 34 inches, and I settled on a 28 by 18 format for the suite of prints. that we're going to be looking at tonight. The downsizing was necessarily mainly because of how long I wanted to devote to the project. Can we have the next slide, please?
Here we see the exhibition in the print department.
Yeah, so flash forward to a year to this British suite of prints called the SCOTUS 6, and it's, of course, titled for those 6 justices that make up the current conservative majority on the Supreme Court. Now, Richard, I love how the gallery's got them displayed here. They're all on a single wall side by side, and it was the first time I was able to see them all together. Now, during the year that I worked on the series, some of the court's most controversial decisions came down. There was the immunity case, which gave the president protection against crimes committed while in office. There is repeal of the Chevron deference, which now restricts the ability of the federal government to regulate businesses. The Dobbs decision, which returned the question of abortion access to the states to regulate. And there was the 303 creative decision, which opened the doors for religious exemptions to discrimination. I love to mine art history and find connections that are going to propel my own work forward. I also like to research historical context of the subjects. In this case, it's like researching the Supreme Court, and I've read enough about the judicial branch to understand that the Federalist Society has invested decades in funding and grooming justices that are sympathetic to a specific interpretation of the law and the Constitution. We could have the next slide now, Richard. We're going to continue to pan around the gallery here. On the left, we can see that the large Ginny and the Supremes piece is over the mantle of the gallery. And the next to that, on the right side of the slide, are 2 pieces. One is Katanji on the High Wire, which is from my latest new series, and the well-known piece, Capital Offense, 1814-2021. I'll have a little bit more to say about those a bit later. Richard, you want to move to the next slide, please? This is the cover for the custom portfolio case that I made for the edition numbers of the SCOTUS 6 series. We're going to reserve a certain number as complete sets. The cover image here is one of the crumbling court facade, and it kind of best represented my feelings about this suite. Ultimately, the suite is a rogues gallery, and I'm hoping that history will ultimately bend towards us achieving more freedoms instead of restricting rights. Maybe we could have the second portfolio picture. That shows a little bit more close up the crumbling facade that's on the cover of the portfolio. Indeed, those that have been critical on social media of my portrayal of the justices, which is slightly irreverent, those folks that I end up blocking usually are either in favor of a Christian nationalist or some type of authoritarian replacement for our democracy. We could move on to the individual pieces now with the next slide. I portrayed Justice Kavanaugh with a jury of women suffragettes. And this is symbolic of his confirmation hearing, where he was confronted with his past, which included accusations of not only sexual assault, but blackout drunkenness during his college years. 3 states actually barred women from juries well into the 1960s. And it wasn't until 1994 that the Supreme Court actually ruled that striking a woman from a jury strictly based on her sex was unconstitutional. Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing was halted to give the FBI more time to ask the public for background information on the various allegations that came up during his confirmation hearing concerning his college years. 450 tips were gathered by the FBI. They were returned to Trump's chief of White House counsel, who gave Kavanaugh a clean bill of health despite not having followed up on any of the tips. So in an ideal world, Kavanaugh would not be ruling on women's reproductive rights. In fact, I don't think he would be ruling on anything. Next slide, please, Richard. This piece is Samuel Beset by Durer's Witch. And speaking of those that really should be barred from ruling on women's reproductive rights, this is Justice Samuel Alito. He wrote the majority in the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and returned women's reproductive rights to the states. As part of that rationale for overturning Roe v. Wade, Alito invoked the rulings of one Sir Matthew Hale, a 17th century English jurist, and Hale was noted for both his misogyny and for actually ruling over witch trials. There's a small figure of him over on the right side of this piece. Alito, as he is apt to point out in speeches and editorials, he considers himself a tortured man, under attack for his Catholic beliefs. And because of that, I portrayed him as being harried by the famous Durer etching of a witch. As I worked through this series, hardly a week went by without some sort of controversy popping up concerning the court. For instance, at the last minute, I ended up adding a fish to one of the putti, the small cherub-like figures in here, as a reference to a luxury fishing vacation that was gifted to Judge Alito. Again, he didn't report this in his yearly financials. Now, too late for me to include in this print were his various flag flying controversies, including flying the American flag upside down and flying a Christian nationalist flag at his summer home. Now, to be fair, he ended up blaming his wife in both instances for showing this kind of partisanship. Can you have the next slide, Richard, please? This is called The Immaculate Birth of Amy. Now, following Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death in the final days of the Trump's first term, the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett was pushed through a Republican Senate in a record 30 days. Hypocrisy be damned, because an Obama nomination wasn't honored because the vacancy occurred in the final year of his presidency. The famously arcane rules of the Senate depend on who is in the majority, and that can change the rules or set the rules. Coney Barrett's imagery here in this piece is based on an interpretation of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus and my own interpretation of Handmaids. And these come from Barrett's very conservative religious background with the People of Praise community. Next slide, please. This is John Plays a Mean Pinball. Now, sometimes the title comes first to me, and I work backwards. I've got a small vinyl record collection. I had just found a nice used copy of the rock opera Tommy. And somehow the words John Plays a Mean Pinball got mixed up into the song. And I was kind of off to the races trying to come up with some images to fit the Chief Justice. And in this case, I didn't use any historical images for underpinning the composition. Instead, I ended up combining images and views taken from arcades. The names on the machines, though, are landmark cases with which Roberts is associated. The most famous is Citizens United, which unleashed the flood of dark money into our political system via PACs and gave rise to the oligarch money, such as Elon Musk's ability to actually buy elections. There's a reflection in the glass top of the machine that Robert's staring into, and it's actually his alter ego, Leonard Leo, the former head of the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society, by the way, aside from being responsible for stacking our judiciary with right-wing ideologues, is the author of the Project 2025. Next slide, please. This slide is Neil's Drag Queen Constitution Hour. Justice Neil Gorsuch preaches his ideas of textualism and originalism to obtain his preferred partisan outcomes. I portray him here holding forth to children because he seems very inclined to talk down with impatience and constant interruptions. I've listened to several Supreme Court hearings, and it's tough to figure out who is the most insufferable between Gorsuch and Alito. I mean, one of Gorsuch's pet peeves concerns the environmental laws and his belief that the EPA constantly oversteps its authorities to regulate polluters by relying on experts who he believes may be politically partisan. However, in a recent case, the EPA versus Ohio, the self-styled environmental expert Gorsuch continually referred to the greenhouse gas nitrogen oxide as laughing gas, which is actually nitrous oxide. I show him holding the Constitution upside down here for the convoluted manner in which he interprets it. The elephant in the background here is a nod to the fact that the GOP was able to steal his seat after blockading an Obama nomination. Now the next slide. All right. This piece here is not part of the SCOTUS 6, but it's included in the exhibition here. This is a monoprint, being one-of-a-kind print. And it's called The Best Court That Money Can Buy. Shortly after Biden dropped out of the presidential race and Kamala Harris took over the campaign reins, I began a series of monoprints called the Herald series. And I first created a woodcut of a rider on a horse bearing two banners. I would use one for a headline and one for a brief Twitter-like commentary. And the commentaries themselves came from trending topics that I would find from the two presidential campaigns. I would print out the commentaries on an inkjet printer and then paste them back into the woodcut banners. I would end up posting them to stories on Instagram. Stories is a feature that displays for 24 hours and it's gone. I chose that format because with our short attention spans, that's about how long these news topics remain current these days. Now, 30 days before the election, I ended up starting a second series. I carved a second piece. It's similar to this, but it's a man riding an elephant carrying banners. And it was dedicated to the disinformation campaign that Elon Musk on his Twitter, formerly Twitter site, that was in service to the Trump campaign. And again, these are monoprints, one of a kind, although they do work as a series. The piece on exhibit here is just one example from the first series, which is about 24 unique images. The second series with the elephant, I ran for a month, and that has 31 images. Next slide, please. On the right, you see my latest piece. This is Katanji on the High Wire. And the piece is my beginning of a new three-piece series that I'm working on. And I've started it to round out my interest in the Supreme Court. It's a bit of a palate cleanser. and I'm calling it the I Dissent series. And it's going to feature the three women that comprise the remaining progressive members of the court. Now, Ketanji Brown Jackson achieved a really unique milestone. She became the first woman, first Black woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court. Now, despite being considered one of the most qualified candidates in recent history, she faced a brutal campaign against her from the far right. I'm sure Biden did her no favors. He announced ahead of time that he intended to nominate a Black woman if given the opportunity to appoint a justice. And this led many on the right to totally ignore her many credentials. I think we have a slide of the MFA show next. Yeah. Finally, we're going to, as part of the exhibit at Child's Gallery, we're exhibiting my capital offense 1814-2021. And I'm also honored that it's at the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston. Their show called The Power of the People, Art and Democracy. In capital offense 1814-2021, I contrast the enemy from abroad with the enemy within. They're accomplishing the same goal, that's the sacking of this capital. The work combines an 1814 British woodcut that celebrates their sacking of the American capital with a January 6th insurrectionist similar celebration. And I think the question becomes, how will this history be written? Because it said that victors write the history. Now, already we've heard that the attackers of the Capitol will be pardoned. And they've already been hailed as hostages and political prisoners. The instigators of the attack on the Capitol were never prosecuted. And the federal case against Donald Trump is sure to be quashed. So am I really portraying heroes or villains? I'm wondering whether there's going to be ambiguity in the future concerning the meaning of the piece here. And I think we're down to the final slide, Richard. Yeah.
So
I've got a couple more remarks on this.
Sure. I'm going to leave this slide on. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. I'm going to say that art can be a mirror to society. And then, yet, what happens when the society doesn't like what they see in that mirror? I'm wondering whether there's going to be a chilling effect on the art exhibited by institutions. Will they become afraid to rock the boat during the next 4 years? And I'm wondering whether artists are going to self-censor to blend in, or to fit in, or to try to get ahead. I think when all the pundits finish the post-game analysis on this, there's going to be one thing that stands out, and that's the amount of disinformation that we've been fed over the last 100 days or so. And much of the blame goes to our really failing legacy media that's pursued profits over the truth. Now, I'm hoping that the art world is going to be up to the task of standing up against media empires such as that by the Murdochs and the Musks. And I'll finish with this one thought here. I believe that a healthy art world is going to contain a multitude of styles, not all political, and it's going to satisfy our incredible range of emotions and human aspirations. But the next 4 years, at a minimum, are going to require much of artists. And during this time, I really believe in the power of art to bring us some hope and some truth. Cultural workers and institutions are going to be pressured to conform to the government's fundamentalist swing. I mean, boards of directors may want to avoid controversy to please wealthy donors, but museums such as the MFA they're going to need to continue bringing exhibitions such as Power of the People to the public. And we must continue really to support each other in the arts whenever and however we can. I mean, not just the safe art of the megastars or the favorites being pushed by oligarchs, but the art of minorities, the art of women, the art of the marginalized that are already being targeted by the MAGA movement. And those artists whose voices are speaking to more freedom, more equality, and more community. I believe we must not obey in advance. And I'll go back to Richard for his thoughts on this.
Well, I think what's really interesting to me is that you mentioned that you remember living in the difficult times that were the 60s and all of the tumult that was happening. And I had even forgotten about the National Guard situation. And so I guess my question is like, do you feel like this is just an example of the pendulum really swinging really far back, or do you really feel like we have moved backwards in a way that will make it very difficult to move forwards?
It's a difficult question. I mean, I've seen it swing violently. I mean, the 60s and early 70s, because of the war and what happened with the assassinations, was a very fraught time. We were very close to, I think, a civil war at that point. We came back from that. But we were dealing with regular politicians at that point. I mean, now we have like a totally different kind of person in Donald Trump and the type of people that he's bringing in. They're using really democracy against itself. So it's going to be interesting. I do have faith that we can bring it back. I hope I'm not whistling past the graveyard, though.
Well, I think it's also interesting for me because I have wondered, I've said to many people that institutions have been really trying to diversify their collections and their exhibitions by collecting and showing the work of the marginalized. And I wondered myself if that is going to have to stop, mainly because of the sheer number of people that now are okay with the way that things are. I've worried that, I mean, we have had, I think we laughed about it, but, we've had people that have unsubscribed to the website, to the gallery because of what was termed left-wing political propaganda. I take that as a compliment, and I actually see the value that art has to put a mirror up to ourselves. And I think that I'm hopeful that artists like you, William, and lots of other artists will continue that. I know that I'm not going to change doing what we're doing here. And so I think that as a community, we all need to sort of support each other in ways that we haven't had to before, because I think a lot of things are going to change. And it's interesting to me how sort of, the thing that always interests me about art is, when you're in the zeitgeist, you don't really know if you're in the zeitgeist, and you don't really know it until later. But I think in looking back, you've been completely in the zeitgeist, and I don't think anyone actually thought that the Dobbs decision would happen, as well as some other things, and so now it's a whole new ball game. So I am going to read a question from Siban. This was superb. Your work is so important, and thanks as well to your gallery for standing strong. I especially loved hearing about your research into historic woodcuts. Are there any points in history, especially darker history, where you can point to a woodcut and say you think you saw it making a difference to political outcomes? For example, what was the Uncle Tom's Cabin or the Jungle of woodcuts? Major artworks that really shifted the political climate. That's a good question.
That's a great question. It's hard to point out any single pieces, but I will point to like some artists that have inspired me. I look at the works of Goya. Um, Kathy Kollwitz comes to mind um, because of her woodcuts, she was forced to resign from her teaching position in Germany, and the Nazis removed her work from museums. Um, I've looked a lot at William Kentridge working as a Jewish man in apartheid South Africa. I look a lot towards Kara Walker, who does a lot with interpreting the Black experience in America, Mexican muralists. Um, Going back in history, maybe like some of the political cartoons of Daumier. Um, there's been some of the best works in art history have been made under very difficult circumstances. Now, I don't envy any of us that are working right now that we're going to have to live through difficult times to make great work, but it's probably going to happen. I mean, Picasso did Guernica during the Franco era. So, I mean, great works can be made in difficult times.
Well, I mean, and I think that you know makes the point that art is a form of protest and can be a form of protest and a productive form at that.
Yes, I believe it's a subtle form of protest, but it could get people thinking about things in a different way that they may not realize on a conscious level being spoon-fed something like from Fox News or something. They may see something that uh, maybe is a little bit more immediate if they see, somebody suffering or something in an artwork, a photograph, um, a play or something. There may be like that kind of connection that isn't just like hammered through the constant repetition of like news.
So with the new suite that you're doing on the progressive Supreme Court justices, after that, where do you see uh, what do you see yourself commenting on? The House, the Senate, media, um, Musk.
Well, I have been wanting to like delve into disinformation more, how we're fed propaganda, um, which brings to mind like some of the yellow journalism of the past century. So there are some historical references to the way we're consuming information that I'd like to turn to after I finish the court stuff, which I think will take another several months to finish the three ladies here. But like I said, that's a little bit of a palate cleanser. They're much more uplifting than the rogues gallery that I've been doing in the suite of the conservative far right guys and
So I
ladies.
do want to remind people that if you have any questions, you can either post them in the question and answer box or in the chat feature. Um, but so back to the use of historical images. Is there a particular historical image in your mind that you don't necessarily know uh, how it relates, but it will at some point?
Oh God. I don't have a specific one in mind. Um, but I do, you know, the piece with the Alito piece where the witch was, I used the the witch, that just sticks with me a lot, just because of the kind of the way women have been oppressed. It's just seems like I want to do more with witchcraft and the idea of oppression.
Well, that goes back to your use of the reference of the Handmaid's Tale.
Yes, that's true.
So, Joan Hall has asked, what do you think of where the MFA placed your print in the Art of Democracy exhibit, which she says is wonderful, which I agree with.
What is the question again?
What do you think of where your work was actually placed in relation to the other works in the exhibition?
Well, truthfully, I haven't seen the exhibition yet. I've only seen the photographs of it. I haven't been up to Boston yet to see that. I hope to do
I do
that.
want I do want to share something with you that I don't know if you know, but we have had multiple people that have gone to the MFA, seen the exhibition, and then come to the gallery to see your exhibition here. So I do recommend to everyone that they see that. Um, so um, so we have a question from Myron Miller, and he says, how do you see younger artists in their 20s and 30s relating to the political protest aspects of art and the needs and challenges of today's society?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting because I think it's just been the last handful of years that I've started seeing institutions really paying attention to our minority, our marginalized, the women, and giving them more of a look. Um, Gallery shows, whatever. So I think there's been slightly, I'm going to say slightly more um, opportunity. So I hate to see it going back just because this president is like so. I mean, they've labeled DEI as like a bad word now. You know, they're gonna like it's going to be very chilling, I think, for young people. So that's why I'm hoping that we find our community. We have to be even more supportive on, I think, on the local levels, because I don't know what's going to happen on the bigger uh, venues, larger galleries. But on the very small gallery, local levels, I think we have to be even more supportive of our young people.
Well, I do. I read something about it's called the tolerance paradox, which is that if you tolerate intolerance, you're supporting intolerance. Um, and I worry that some younger people will just decide to um, not do the harder work, which is actually making the art that's meaningful, I think. So we have another question. Thank you, Everett, for your work. And thank you, Giles. So today, Stephen King referred to Elon Musk as the new, quote, first lady, unquote. You
I
think,
saw
do you think this is a theme that you could work with?
that. Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah, I mean, if I do get into disinformation, I think Elon Musk is a perfect target subject for that, because um, I was kind of late to Twitter myself, and never really a big user of it, except to kind of stalk and see what was happening. And then after Elon purchased that and just turned it into basically a right wing hellhole, trying to force feed us all this right wing propaganda all the time. Um, it just seems like, oh, it's kind of what 4chan used to be, just like just a propaganda network. So yeah, I think he's going to be like a good target. And I did, applaud Stephen King for being kicked off, it's like a badge of honor. Um, and actually, just before I got on here, I've deactivated my account on Twitter. I used to like just, I'd post my art, my shows and stuff uh, on there, but I'm totally done with it now that the election's over. I don't really need it.
I think you do a great job with your social media feeds on Instagram. Your reels are always quite popular, and I do think people like seeing your process. Um, so, do you believe that you will remain hopeful?
I will. I am hopeful. It took a couple of 3 days to like get some perspective on what just happened. Um, it was like it's a grieving process. I mean, it's like you're losing a loved one or something, because I did have hope that the momentum was going to be on the progressive side, and I had hope that my fellow Americans would go along with this, but their better angels, I think, failed them in this case. I don't think it's a mandate by any means that they're talking about a mandate, but I think it's 2% of people, like in a few fringe states, um, that we have to convince to come back and like reconsider what's happened here,
so a
which
friend
I
of
think is going to happen. These people always overplay their hand. There's going to be a lot of suffering. It's going to get worse before it gets better, especially if we start the deportations.
well,
Uh,
that's what I was going to say because I have a friend of mine who has a trans son, and she said that there was a lot of anxiety about what the result was, and that her only expectation was is that they would um, overreach, and that in the overreaching create a backlash. Um, I think that that's entirely possible. I also feel like they've also gamed the system so they could possibly not, you know, have to deal with that. So I do think it's a little bit like the your analogy of the plane hitting the World Trade Center, the second tower, because it's like, okay, this really is happening, and what happens next? But we know everything's different, you know.
yeah, so we know it's world changing. We just don't know how. And it's just more than our own country. I think it's going to have worldwide ramifications. It'll certainly have ramifications in what happens in Israel, what happens in Ukraine. Um,
So what advice would you give to young artists?
you know, I the only advice I really have is like this is really a long game. It's not any kind of a sprint. It's going to take a long time. I mean, you just have to go into the studio. You're going to have to be like a working class kind of artist to approach this correctly. You can't expect fame right away. It could happen. I mean, it could, I mean, some people become YouTube stars overnight or something. I mean, it could happen, but I think the main thing is you have to show up every day in the studio, whether you're inspired or not, and you have to work like it's a job, and it is a
I mean, I've
job.
I've told people that the most successful artists, I believe, are the ones that approach it, as a discipline and more like a marathon than a sprint. We have a question for you from Paige Moore. She says, have you ever participated or considered creating guerrilla art or publications or graffiti with your prints?
Oh, no, I've considered it. I mean, I know, but back when we were doing protesting the Vietnam War, I mean, there was, graffiti and pamphlets and posters and that kind of stuff. But I haven't really done that on that level recently. I mean, during the Occupy Wall Street stuff, I was doing some video art, so I have some pieces in that vein. But I mean, most of my work does revolve around some sort of social commentary, whether it's political or social commentary, but just maybe not quite in that vein.
Well, it's going to be exciting to see where you go from this. Excuse me. It's going to be exciting to see where you go from this. I do want to uh, suggest to people that they come in and see the exhibition because as we all know that art is different experienced in person. Um, and I want to thank you, Bill, because I think that that you know art does have the power to move people, and it's a matter of how we do it. And I know that I know that, you know, when I particularly like your comment about how the Capitol fence is going to be interpreted in, say, 100 years. We just don't know that yet. But,
Well, I
so,
hope people have swung back and people realize that these are villains again.
one more from Charlie Norris. Very compelling exhibit in discourse. Prints in the form of broadsides and leaflets have made impacts in the past. Is there a place now for returning to using woodcuts and other print forms for mass distribution of political statements as a more traditional social medium than our digital format? Your ephemeral Instagram pieces were a form of the traditional agitprop leaflet. Visit portions of the MFA show to allude to such traditional use of prints. Similar question, but yeah, I mean, I think it's well taken.
I was looking at those Instagram stories as a kind of like a leafleting. I definitely had it in the back of my mind that it was like a form of like standing on the street corner and passing out my woodcuts to passersby, just for the
Well, I think that
digital.
the Herald series, the monoprints are particularly lend themselves particularly well to that. I do want to point out we're approaching the witching hour, and we are recording this talk, and we record all of our talks, and we do send them out. I do want to, so that will be available for everyone at both. We have a YouTube um, channel, but I do want to point out that the set is, I believe it's an edition of 12. We had reserved, um, I believe, 8 for full sets for institutions. And, to give you an example, Capital Offense is in the collections of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Boston Public Library, and about 3 or 4 other museums. And I do think that you know that institutions will be particularly interested in this. But for all of you attorneys out there and everyone political junkies, individual impressions are available as well. And one thing that I think a lot of people may not know, and I didn't even know this until recently, is that William makes his own frames, which is quite exciting. So I'm just going to put the last, because I'm just going to put the last slide up with the information on our website and our hours. If anyone is interested, please feel free to reach out to us. And William, I really do want to thank you because I was a little bit anxious about this talk just because of the topic and what happened. And so I think that it's good that this is happening like right at the moment. And so I just encourage you to keep it going, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Richard, and to everybody on staff. You've been very supportive of this, and we need more child's galleries that are willing to put themselves out there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It makes it all the more worthwhile. So with that, everyone, have a good evening and take care.